Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dragons and Dice. Today I'm going to be going over 8 tips for new DMs to help when they're running those first few games that they try to tackle. Welcome to Dragons and Dice. Okay, so I've been DMing since I started playing D&D. I've gotten to be a player a few times, and I'm currently in a campaign, but we don't really get to meet that often, so I don't get to play a whole lot. And that's just kind of the lot I've been dealt with D&D, and I have to say I love it. It's a blast being a DM, but there were a lot of things I wish I'd have known when I started out that would have made doing that a lot easier. I've always been a bit of a board game and cards junkie. I used to play bridge or board games every week, but then when the terrible COVID happened, all that got stopped, and left me looking for something to kind of fill that void that was going to take the place of my game night and card night each week. And so we all got to talking, me and a bunch of my friends, my brother-in-law that I played bridge with, and it was like, hey, I've always wanted to try out some D&D. A couple of the people we were there with had played before, but not since like 3.5. And so we were like, yeah, this sounds great. But we didn't have anyone to DM. And so I kind of got nominated or volunteered, however you want to go about it. But that's what ended up happening. And so, long story short, we decided we just start out with the D&D Essentials starter kit as a good way to kick off trying out D&D for a bunch of new players because we are all kind of starting this journey together. Started off, there were like 5 of us, that grew to 6, and in a few months we'd finished that campaign, and then I decided, hey, that was a blast. Why not do an entire 1 to 20 homebrew campaign? Because that's the thing to do when you've never DM'd before. And so, after getting into all that, these are a few tricks that I either used or wish I'd known when I first started that I think would make your DM life a lot easier. Okay, for number one, if you're going to DM your first campaign and not just do like a one shot tester run, I would suggest starting off with a pre made campaign. It really sets up some nice bumpers for you to be able to dip your toe into the Game Master waters. As I said, we did the Dragons of Icespire Peak. It was a really good way to start out. It has a simplified rule book with it in the kit, and it's pretty thorough on what there is to happen. You don't have to use this one, it's just what we picked, but this one was designed to be ran and played by a bunch of folks that aren't experienced with D&D. It was a great way to start. And the nice thing about doing a pre-made campaign is that it kind of sets the boundaries for you as the DM and for your players, and it takes a lot of pressure off you as the DM as you're new and you're kind of learning to run the games as you go. And I'm sure a lot of DMs probably start off as players and then want to make that switch and try out DMing after that. I didn't do that, so this is kind of what helped me out. Having that pre-made campaign, it was really helpful. And here's my suggestions on how to use those. I read the whole books first. That way I knew where the whole campaign was headed and the stuff that was going to pop up each session, and that just made it easier to navigate for me. And after that, then before each session, I would just reread what I thought that the party was going to get to that night in our next session. And I'll say one of the nice things about the Icepire Speak kit that we got is it contained like a small world map. It wasn't too big of area to have to try to hold in your head as the DM of everything that's going on in the world. It's all kind of isolated in a, you know, 20 square mile area. It's pretty short, just a few days travel. You can get across the whole place that you're playing at. There's a town, a couple of cities, not a whole lot to it. And it's not too much to handle starting out. And looking back on that campaign, the other thing that was really nice, and I didn't realize at the time, was that the party gets their quest in like groups of 3 or 4 in that campaign, that little pre-made, and then they get to finish those in any order. And as a DM, this is good because it kind of gets you in the habit of being prepared that, hey, they're going to go and do this. Oh, wait, they're not. They're going to go and do whatever they want. And it kind of prepares you, but they only have like 3 or 4 things, so you don't have to prep for like a full sandbox style campaign. You get to just, oh, I know these 3 things that can happen, and then the players get to pick. And I mean, as a DM, it's okay sometimes to put people on rails and just, drive them right down the path toward the end of the thing. It's not really the joy of D&D. The real joy of D&D is like how versatile and big, and that like anything you can imagine, you can try to do. So it's a good thing as a DM not to railroad people too much and just like put them on a track and they're just kind of like viewing what happens as they go along and dropping some dice. This little starter campaign having like multiple quests kind of lets the players have a good feel for what they get to do, and they're getting to make choices and decide which ones they want to go to and in what order. And as you as the DM, it gives you some good practice getting used to that kind of mechanic if it's not something you've run before. My next tip for DMing is that it's okay to get stuff wrong because you're going to get a lot of stuff wrong when you first start. I messed up so many things when I first started. I still mess up something almost every session. It just never fails. But here's the awesome little secret about it: no one knows most of the times, and if they do, it's not a big deal. Starting off, I didn't have a good handle on the rules, especially with how spells work. I don't think I made anyone in our whole first campaign make a Constitution saving throw. And we had two clerics and a wizard. They were running through stuff like crazy. One of the clerics was the tank, and he just had spiritual weapon out the whole time. Never had to make a concentration save. I mean, looking back, it's like, well, that's really nice. If you get to cast concentration spells without concentration, it's really OP. Here's the thing: we had a blast playing it. It didn't matter. You don't need to get too caught up in trying to know everything right off the bat. Just try to make your sessions flow well. And then if something comes up that you and your players don't know, just make a ruling on it on the fly. Write down a note about it in your notebook, and then look it up before the next session. Tell the players what you found out, and that's a great way to learn as a player and as a DM. And I mean, DM for experienced players, if you're new to it, they can probably help you with this unless, they're turds and they try to exploit you and, pull the wool over your eyes because you don't know everything that's going on. But even if they do, it's not that big a deal. Let it go. Look it up between the sessions and then change the way you handle that ruling in the future. The point of this all is to, make it fun and play more D&D. It's more fun to play than to spend 5 or 10 minutes every time that something comes up when you're first starting and you have to be like, oh, I don't know how to handle that, I need to make a ruling. Just be confident in what ruling you make. Most of the stuff in D&D is kind of common sense. There's some nuanced stuff that you'll learn as you go, but it's much better to keep the flow of the game going, and then if something was wrong, talk about it with your players afterwards and change it the next time you do it. It's not really that big of a deal if you got something a little off on how one spell worked or how certain saves are supposed to go. The point of it is to have fun. I mean, the first rule in D&D is if you don't like these rules, change them. So it's like you can't really mess up. Don't sweat it. You're just getting started. Your buddies will give you crap for it. It's what buddies do. But it's not a big deal. Just make the table a fun place and a safe place for everyone to play. Tip number 3 is going to be keep your table small starting out. This is going to make your life so much easier. We started off with 5 players. That's a pretty standard setup. It's a good number for D&D. But if I was making a suggestion, start off with 3 or 4 players if you can make that work. If you have 3 or 4 people that can be dedicated to a game and they're going to show up, that's a really sweet spot to be at because it just makes your life so much easier to manage a table that's that side. I understand what happens when people find out that you're running a D&D game. Anybody that's ever played is like, oh, do you have a spot for me? And nobody wants to tell their buddies no, or like, oh, no, you can't come this week, we're full, or anything like that, because it's like, hey, they're your friends, and D&D's a blasty blast. I understand why everybody wants to play if they can find a spot. With that in mind, it's really easy to let your table get away from you if you're not careful. I really like 4 players as a DM just because it's a lot easier when you're starting out to balance combat for small groups. And this is one of the things that I struggled with starting out. And the pre-made modules help with that because they have them set up like add this many monsters if you have 4 players, add this many monsters if you have 5 players, etc., etc. And that helps. But for your first campaign, I would cap it at 5 players at the most and you as the DM, so a 6-person table. And I would say 4 is ideal for starting out. And like I said, the reason why is that balancing combat for big parties, it's a it's a lot. You either have to use a buttload of small monsters, and this causes your combats to be a big slog fest, and they take forever. Or you're like, hey, I'm gonna just use some bigger CR monsters, and then you take the chance that when those big monsters drop an old crit on somebody, now somebody's got to make a new character, which is part of D&D. And, people die. That's part of the game, but it shouldn't be the goal in my opinion. And it's one of those things like starting out, you don't want to just be like lopping heads off as a DM because nobody's going to want to play at your table if it's like, well, they just kill everyone. So keeping the table a little bit smaller makes it where it's a lot easier for you to kind of have good control over that. And then after you're comfortable running combat and letting everyone have their turns, because that's another joy of having a small table, is like it's a lot if you have 8 players at a table to make sure that everyone gets to have interactions when you're not doing combat encounters, you're doing role play. And it's like you don't want to end up leaving people just at the wayside, because you'll find as you start DMing that you're going to have extroverts that like doing funny voices and being star of the show, and then you're going to have introverts who like the game just as much and care just as much about the role play aspect, but just aren't as outspoken. And if you have 8 people, it's easy to like get that stepped on, like, and not keep it like even with everyone that you're DMing for. And that's why I suggest starting out that you run a smaller table until you get a good handle on that. After you're comfortable with it, you can blow the doors off of it. I mean, I've run sessions with 8 players and a random NPC that they took turns controlling. It's slow running 9 players on a board at one time, but it works. We have fun. It's great. It's just a lot to keep up with on who's concentrating on what spells, who's where on the boards. It's each time you add a new person, it adds another level of complication to your combats and to your social encounters. And for that reason, starting out, keep it around 4 to 5 people, and it'll make starting DMing so much easier on you. Tip number 4, when you're starting out DMing, keep notes during your session. This is just a good habit to have as a DM. There are so many little things that will come up during your games that it's really easy to forget, especially if you're running a long campaign. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen when you're spending 3 to 4 hours and there's 5 or 6 people doing stuff at a table. So I keep notes on something that's funny that happens, or if there's something important and I want to be able to remember it for later. And it kind of depends on how you learn, but the simple act of writing stuff down makes things stick in my head for me better than just trying to recall like, oh, what happened last week. But if I've got like a few like pointer notes, it kind of really ticks my brain back into what happened on the last session. And the other thing that I like about taking notes as you go through is you can reference them for later in your campaign. If someone does a crazy stunt and kills a monster, and there was like people there to witness it, take a note. Then maybe later in the campaign, when you come to a new town or a city, you can have an NPC drop a little line of like, are you that same tabaxi that killed that hydra off the salt marshes? Oh man, can I have your autograph? It's just a cool little snippet, but it gives that PC that's at your table a nice little flex. And then the other advantage of that is that you'll end up more people trying crazy cool stuff because they're like, hey, I did that cool thing. And then like people reference it, and it's kind of, I mean, it's why you're playing D&D, is for all the cool stuff you can pull off. Make notes of it. It also let you keep up with like what your players are excited about and what they don't like. If you see stuff that goes over like a fart in church, make a note of it. Drop that stuff from your campaign if you had a bunch of it planned later. Like if you have super complicated puzzles that don't have enough clues, and it's like you see people losing interest, take a note down. Hey, maybe less puzzles or puzzles with more clues. And it'll just give you, some good guidelines for when you're planning out your next sessions. And, if you end up with someone wanting to do something at a party, is like making a bunch of decisions, and they're like, we want to go here or we want to go there. And like the group decides one thing, writing notes down of what the party did not decide to do is a great way to keep up for the things that the other players at the table might be interested in. Like if someone wanted, more traps, or like, ooh, I really was hoping to solve that puzzle, and the party's like, well, we're just going to tie some ropes and jump over that ravine instead of trying to solve it. You know that player likes traps, you know the other people don't. It gives you a good feel for your table, and it lets you just keep up with how and what your players are interested in. Another area I really like to keep notes about is when you're in towns, you can kind of get a good feel for what your party is looking for by what they ask the shopkeepers for. So if someone walks in, they're like, hey, do you have horses for sale? And maybe that player wants a mount. Or do you have any special crossbows? You know, like it gives you a good feel of what the players at your table are looking for loot wise, because sometimes you don't have all that stuff planned out in your shops and they may not have the items that your players want, or it's too early in the campaign for that. But because they ask about it, if you put a little note down, it's a good way to keep a feel on what's, in the back of their minds, and like, ooh, I hope I get this or that. And it's, gives you a good feel for your players. I will make a note on notes. See what I did there? Don't stop the game to write down in your journal entry. These should be like quick shorthand, just jot down like while you're doing your role play, while you're in your combat. This shouldn't be like hold on and then write out in 2-3 paragraphs. This should be like 4 or 5 word sentences, like so and so wants this, less traps, more puzzles, blah blah blah. Like keep it quick and concise, and don't let this be something that detracts from the flow of your game, because as the DM, that's really the most important thing you're doing, is like managing the flow of the sessions. Tip number 5, and if you made it this far, you're already going to have this one taken care of, but that's listen to some podcasts, watch some YouTube videos on DMing. And this seems really self-serving to say that. And also, thanks for listening to this podcast if you made it this far. But all jokes aside, it's a great way to learn. This does come with a little bit of a caveat. Starting off, I listened to D&D podcasts that were on information, not actual play. I started out with and absolutely love the Dungeon Cast. Shout out to Demogorgon. Uh, and it was a podcast that was just about like kind of all things D&D. It did lore, monsters, built characters. And the thing was, it was a good way to get a feel for all the mechanics, like how backstories worked, how about running games. I love actual play podcast. Maybe someday I'll get to do one, pop dreams. But here's the thing, a lot of those are really high end productions, and the DMs and the players are actual voice actors. That's not the background I have. I do landscaping. I don't ever expect to be Matt Mercer. He does crit roll if you don't know. But I do voices for my character. I practice them while I'm mowing. That's where I get to like refine my little, DM NPC voices. And then when I feel comfortable with them, I drop them into the game. The point is like keep your expectations reasonable. If you're not a voice actor, that's perfectly fine. Your NPCs don't need 8 different accents for all the different species. And that's why I suggest listening to stuff that is like for DMs and players and about running the games and D&D mechanics. Listening to actual play podcasts can kind of get your expectations jacked up a little high. Like you feel like, oh, I should be able to do this and this and this. That's a big production. This is a fun night with your friends at somebody's house or on your computer online. All that stuff's great. And if you're good at it, I suggest doing as much of it as you're comfortable with. But if you're going to start off when you're looking for material, look for stuff that's going to give you like a better handle on your rules, cool ideas about like, oh, I want to add these type monsters. That sounds like a cool monster add in this situation. Oh, that's an awesome trap. Stuff like that that will give you stuff you can use in game, as opposed to being like, oh man, I'm not as cool as having my own animated series that's on Amazon Prime running a D&D game. Like that's not really reasonable expectations for any of us. I will say, if you're not the type of person that kind of has like the demeanor for that, and like you want some D&D material and you're going to listen to actual play podcast, my suggestion would be take things from those games that you like and add them to your game. Still everything that you think will fit into your game. Obviously not if you're like trying to make a profit off of it. Don't like perjure people's material. But if you hear somebody made a cool wild shape for a druid that was in their campaign, make a custom wild shape for the druid in your campaign. Even if they've listened to the same podcast, I bet they're going to love it. And when they get the chance, I bet they're still going to wild shape into it and not even think twice about it. So, just borrow stuff from other people's games, you know, and if you have a job or a time that allows you to find, a few good podcasts, listen to them, learn from what you can, take the stuff you like, add it to your games, and, you obviously like some sort of podcast. You've made it this far in the episode, so shouldn't be too hard. Tip number 6, and it's time for homework. Yep, that's right. Tip number 6 is do your prep. And later on, once you get comfortable doing games and running sessions, you can run sessions with almost zero prep work if you've been doing it for a while. But I like to be prepared. It's just kind of like my personality. I mean, I know sometimes life has a real problem respecting my D&D addictions and gets in the way of my prep work. But when I first started, that would have been a real pain for me. Luckily, it was the winter, and as I said, I do landscaping, so that was like my slow season. I had plenty of extra time. And here's the if I was gonna make a suggestion, if you're gonna have a 4-hour session, I would suggest about 40 minutes of prep sometime during the week before you run that session. And here's what I like to focus on when I'm prepping for a game night. I read through the material, whether it's pre-made campaign or homebrew that I've made myself, so I know what's going to be happening and kind of have it fresh in my mind. And I go over whatever areas I think the party might get into and see if there's any traps or hidden things and stuff. That way I don't miss it when I get there. And like I said, right now my whole campaign is homebrewed, and so I have a really good idea of where everything is, as I was the one that made it all. But with pre-made materials, it's good to do a refresher, and that way you know what the goal of each session is. And that should be like a quick 15, 20 minutes of refreshers. You can read those books whenever you have time or whatever, works for you. And if you've already read all the material, like I suggested, when you first got the books, this will be it'll really tick your brain. It's like now you're getting it a second or a third time. And then the next thing I like to do is I like to make sure I have a good handle on what the monsters that they're going to be fighting that evening. I don't try to memorize the stat box. That's a little ridiculous and a little too much to do. I just peruse them to see if there's anything unique that I need to keep in mind when I'm running their stat blocks. Like DM note here, resistances on monsters and monsters that have advantage on certain saves are the easiest thing in the world to overlook when you first start. I did it so many times. I'd be like, oh, it makes your monsters super squishy if they're supposed to have resistance to all, slashing damage. And then when I first started, I would forget. And there'd be so many times I'd be like, dang, that big guy died fast. And I thought, it would be tankier. And then I'll look at the stat block. I'm like, oh, he was supposed to be taking half damage from spells this whole time. This is one of those things that a little bit of prep work, and you'd be like, oh yeah, this guy has resistance. This guy has advantage on saving throws against dex-based attacks. Just, keeps it fresh in your mind. Make sure fights, run smoother and be more accurate in their CR ratings. The other things I like to do with my prep time, I'll use a few minutes to go over loot. If I've got homebrew items that are going to drop, I'll make little cards out for them, write them out on note cards or however I'm going about that at the time. And then I also like to go through any social encounters I think I'll have and just kind of keep a refresher of what the NPCs that the party's going to be meeting. And if they've got a funny voice, I might, say a few lines in it to make sure I've got it fresh in my brain. I will say, on doing voices for NPCs, I'm not the greatest at them, but I've found that syntax gives more uniqueness to your characters than having a good accent. So when I'm trying to make up voices for characters, a lot of times the thing I focus on changing the most is the syntax of their speech. Whether, that's one of what makes Yoda sound so Yoda-y is that, Yoda-like, you do not have to sound if Yoda-like, you talk. It's that kind of theory of that kind of reads like Yoda, even though I'm just saying it in my same voice. And then just add in what little bit of accent you have. And while you're doing your prep work, it's a great time to work on these things as you're, ticking through, a few things you got to do, drop a few voices. It just makes your nights run smoother. And as a DM, that's your goal. And that's what the prep work's there for, is to keep a good flow of your sessions. Tip number 7, and this one's going to be an important one. Don't get frustrated when things don't go the way you've planned. A big chunk of DMing games is going to involve you just rolling with the punches. You're going to plan out all kinds of encounters, events, meetings with NPCs, puzzles, games. And here's the crappy thing, those players at your table are going to poop all over them. A lot of times just by accident. Sometimes they're your friends. They're going to do it intentionally just to, rib you a bit. And sometimes in creative ways you never thought of. No matter how much you try to prepare for things, you have 4 to 5 other creative people at your table, and they are always going to come up with things that you didn't anticipate. And that's fine. Here's my tip for this: enjoy that. Those are the fun times. And what makes DMing really cool is that, like, you're telling a story together, and yeah, you're kind of like guiding which way it's going, but it's really a pick your own adventure type book. And sometimes the players are going to throw curveballs, elaborate airtight trap, and you're going to have someone circumvent that with doing something that you just never thought of. It's just impossible to think of all the things that the players are going to come up with. You will have the coolest NPC encounters planned, and the party will meet that person and never even ask their name. They'll just walk right on by. Note, if you do want the party to ask someone's name, don't prep them at all. You can have a random, like, nobody NPC, and that'll be the person that your party wants the entire backstory, their 3 kids' names, what their wife does for a living, how they fared in the last war. When you don't do the prep work on an NPC, that'll be the one the party loves you. Just roll those punches. Make it up on the fly. That's what DMing is about. It's, you know, give and take with your players and telling a story together. I would bet that about probably 15% of the stuff that I make for my campaigns never gets found or seen the light of day. They'll just, they went a different route. They never, saw that trap. They did something that made, this NPC not viable at this point. That's all part of it. Here's my hint for that: don't let it get you down. That's not wasted work, because, you just put that, in your book, take it home with you, pull it out, reskin it, use it later on in the campaign if you need to, or wherever it works. You got an NPC they missed, that you thought would be awesome role play interactions, just move them somewhere else, reuse them. And here's the joy of it. When you've made it, you can use it anytime, anywhere you need to as the DM. You don't have to, let it get you down that, something you made didn't get used. One of my worst DMing moments ever was I built what I thought was going to be this awesome Temple of Doom escape event. And it was like a 10-round race with obstacles and traps and obviously a giant rolling stone. And this is back before we were playing on VTT, and I like gritted this thing out and I play tested it for like the whole week because I was so jazzed. And I was like, this is going to be awesome. And I made sure it was beatable, and also failable. It was about 30% of the time that you just wouldn't make it, and you've had some bad rolls, you could fail. And here's the thing: we got there, that temple, they get the little gem, the rock starts rolling. I had a creation bard. It's like, hey, I'd like to use my song creation and build a ramp to catch the stone. And to my shame, my initial response was just, I screamed no at the table. And I was like, oh my gosh, no, you can't do that. And he was like, why? And I was like, because it sucks for me. Not my best moment as a DM. Party I play with is super cool though. We counted that dungeon as cleared. They walked out scot free, and then for fun, we just played through that the rest of the night. Point being, nowadays, I would just eat that prep work. I would take that, temple run. I'd incorporate it into another dungeon crawl. Not exactly the same, but it's fine for stuff for like that to happen. That was an awesome moment for that player. He saw a problem, and then he solved it. That's what they're supposed to do. It's your job as the DM to be like open to the fact that there are more one way to skin that cat. Just because you've only thought of 3 or 4 solutions doesn't mean that your players aren't going to come up with 3 or 4 completely different ones. Just be open to it and roll with it. Okay, time for the last tip. That one's real simple. It's have fun. That's the most important part of this. D&D is a great way to blow off steam, escape from, the grind of real life. Keep it light. Make it fun. Add humor to your games. Be goofy. One of the best part about being, a dungeon master is that you get to be a big old goofball. If the DM is hamming it up, it makes the evenings more enjoyable for everyone, and it makes it easier for your players to do the same. I'm not saying just be a jokester the whole time. I have tons of tense, serious parts in my campaigns, but the overall feel of the evening, I always shoot for light and jovial. We're a bunch of goofballs and hams at my table. The D&D table should always be a place where anyone's welcome. They can come in, feel comfortable, and be themselves while they're pretending to be someone else. And if you cultivate that kind of climate at your tables, the rest of that stuff, it's all backseat to that. And, if people are having a good time, it doesn't matter if you didn't run your monsters right. The point of this whole thing is to get together your buddies, tell a cool story together, do cool stuff, fight things, find things, and have fun. That's the goal. And if you're just getting started off, stick with it. DMing isn't, super easy, but if it's something you're interested in, it takes a little bit to find your stride and what your, DM style is. It's just gets easier each time you do it, and I am a huge fan of it. I think it's an absolute blast. I would highly suggest that if you're interested, stick with it for a little while. It'll just get better and easier, and it's really fun. Well, folks, that's it for this episode of Dragons and Dice. Thanks for tuning in and listening to me go on about all the things I think about DMing. I hope it helps, especially if you're, a fledgling DM about to kick off that first campaign or game. Stick with it. It's a blast once you get the hang of it. And if you can, it'd be great if you could give a like, a follow, and subscribe wherever you're getting your podcast, as it helps with the exposure of the show. And until next time, may you DMs be kind, and may your D20s roll high. Bye.